thought that Harry just gave my remarks. I may not end in the same way, but again, thank you to Aparna and to AEI for having me. Like Kim, I also started my career here, just in a different building, so it's always nice to be back. I think I have too many gadgets up here. All right. And also, I should say that I come at this issue, I should move this along, huh? As a working mom, I have 3 young children. I really love being a mother too. I mean, if you told me that my husband was going to be the primary caregiver when I had those babies, I would be like, you're out of your mind. I'm going to spend every minute that I can, and I'm constantly telling my husband that I aspire to be that ideal mom who is like the cookies when my kids get home. Probably more like for like a week, and then it would get old. But I also have a father with Alzheimer's who lives on the West Coast, so I realize that this is not an issue that just affects sort of happy times. It's also that need to take care of aging parents and other people in our lives. And I'm also the head of a women's organization. So we have currently 2 people out on maternity leave, 1 person out for a medical emergency, and so I'm very familiar as sort of the head of an organization what this means in terms of trying to balance work productivity with caring for people who I think of as family, because we're a small staff of 14. But I do think that if we let the data guide us, and this has been a tremendous amount of data here right in front of us, we will come up with sensible policy solutions, Harry mentioned, that will be good for workers, for employees, for businesses, and also, I think, to Brigid's point, for our culture, because it's not just about dollars and cents. This is about what kind of society we want to live in. And I think in our new worlds of sort of changing gender roles, we have to realize that this is no longer just a women's issue. As we sort of stretch our budgets and more households are dependent on 2-earner incomes, this becomes more important. We are, as Brigid noted, there isn't someone necessarily automatically at home. So when someone gets sick, it is a stress in a way that it may not have been in previous generations. And so that means that we do have a new challenge. But I think that before we sort of move to the policy piece, we do have to ask ourselves just how large the problem is. I realize, yes, that the American workplace is terribly behind, that we are up there with, I think what Saudi Arabia has sort of a national paid leave system that we don't have. But there are real drawbacks. We've already heard a little bit about how when women return in some of our European counterparts, they're working part-time, they're working at lower levels. And so I think it's important to keep this in mind, that these are not sort of apples to apple comparisons. And just because Washington doesn't mandate that all businesses provide that, or that we don't have a federal policy, it doesn't mean that companies are failing to provide this. The reality, I think, is fairly encouraging. If you look, I know the statistics, everybody's got a different one, a different number. Even in some of our own publications, I've noticed we're using different numbers, so it's hard to find, to pinpoint the exact numbers, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics found that 75% of full-time workers have access to paid sick leave. 74% have access to paid personal leave. And 88% have access to unpaid family leave. So I think what we're really talking about is low-income workers, as Kim and Juliana pointed out. And I think we want to be careful, as Harry pointed out, that we don't create more barriers to entry, because those are the people who are going to be impacted the most. But before we launch into sort of the deeper discussion of the best policy solutions to tackle this issue per se, I think it's important to take note that women, and I'd sort of go out on a limb here and say that men as well, are not all the same, right? We don't all have equal professional goals, needs, challenges. The decisions I made when I was 22 about the workplace are different from what I'll make today at 39, and certainly they'll probably be different than what I would make 10 years from now. And so I think we want to make sure that the workplace remains this dynamic environment that allows people to make different choices as their needs and their wants and preferences change over time. And I feel like very often, and I thought this was really an interesting point with Pew, that lawmakers will come to us and say, we have this massive problem, with this problem with paid leave. But the reality is, when you ask people, they don't quite see it as that dramatic. They do see the economy as hugely problematic, and I think for a lot of people, the economy is a catch-all phrase for my personal situation, my personal finances, my personal work situation. So it may be higher than the very bottom of the list, but I don't think it's necessarily quite the crisis stage that we often hear it talked about. So in order not to put the cart in front of the horse, IWF did some research last year to talk about, what do women want in the workplace? Before we assume that all they care about is paid leave, let's sort of take a step back. And hopefully this research was intended to inform our discussions on paid leave and on child care. And personally, just from a sort of more conservative perspective, I was kind of wondering, have Republicans and conservatives really been quite this asleep at the wheel? Are they that tone deaf? It's possible. Or is there sort of more to the story? And so we conducted a conjoint analysis, which in effect was just a way of creating forced choices for people. But we looked at a number of different workplace attributes, from workplace flexibility to healthcare packages, employee tenure, bonus structure, vacation leave, things of this nature. And it allowed us to create this constrained choice between job packages, ultimately giving us sort of causal evidence of what job attributes really matter to people, and by how much, right? So it turns out that a lot of the biggest findings, and I'll just flip through these really quickly, you don't have to take note, but in brief, mothers value time off more than non-mothers, sort of to be expected. Non-mothers seem to care about everything but workplace flexibility options and paid sick and vacation leave. So I think that tells us something, in effect, that mothers are flexibility maximizers while non-mothers are earnings maximizers, which I think is what we would sort of encourage people, right? When I first got out of school, I should have been more of an earnings maximizer. I didn't even negotiate my salary, but that's another conversation. But we should be talking about how do you maximize those earnings, and maybe you want to negotiate something with your employer when you don't really need a whole lot of time off. We found that progressive women, interestingly enough, value their annual salary and family medical leave above all else. Conservative women, self-identified in each of these cases, value the character of the company. What Rich Karlgaard at Forbes, he refers to this as the soft features of a company. Things like employee tenure. I think it's a cue to people if it's a good work environment, something like employee tenure. But of course, everybody likes getting more benefits, more wages, so it's easy to talk about universal paid leave, for instance, because who is against the idea of a mom taking some time off or caring for an aging parent? And that's why I think Pew just found that 82% of Americans say that mothers should have access to maternity leave. And I think that that's a good thing. We want to be moving in that direction as a culture and as an environment. I want to feel not resentful towards the women in my office who just had babies, but excited for them and saying, hey, sure, we brought in a temp and we'll shift work around because we're excited for you because you're part of this family and we've invested in you and we think you're going to come back and continue working for us, and we hope that you will. So I think, though, as Isabel mentioned, and as I think was clear from the Pew research, people, and as Harry certainly pointed out, people are, I think, intuitively aware that there are trade-offs and that there are costs associated with these benefits, right? They don't just come out of thin air as much as we would like them to. And when we talk about government paying for them, we're talking about taxpayers. The government doesn't have any money of its own. we give it to them. So I think that people, when they begin to hear other arguments about how some of these policies might affect them, are open to a more substantive conversation. And I think that's important. So at IWF, we've spent a lot of time talking about what an alternative policy might look like that will not burden employers, but that will maximize the choices for employees. And so in our report that we produced last year, Working for Women, which sort of deals with a suite of workplace policies that we hear a lot about, we propose a twofold policy solution, which would include, one, creating savings for leave time through personal care accounts, which would be a tax-preferred account, and provide tax credits for truly small businesses who can offer paid leave. And as we've heard, obviously a lot of businesses would love to be able to offer the kind of robust benefits that their larger counterparts can. And so being able to assist them is something that is not necessarily a downside. For a lot of businesses would say, great, I would love to keep those employees. I simply can't afford to offer what Google can down the street. I don't know if Google's a good example, actually. Or are they? Okay. So the tech industry is not always so great. So I think something to keep in mind is that we already encourage people to save pre-tax dollars for things like health savings accounts, flexible spending accounts, education savings accounts. Obviously, you can't save for everything. I would rather we just had simplified tax system and we can just save, but that's probably not happening anytime in the near future. So at this point, I think it would still be better to give people that option to save. And we recommend up to 12 weeks of pay or capping it at $5,000 so that people would have that money. It would be transportable. If you leave your job, you would still own those resources. And I think nonprofits, and we've seen this in the education sector, could be established. A lot of corporations would love to do this as part of their social responsibility portfolio to help low-income workers. Because once again, those are really the people who are falling through the cracks. So we saw people making over $75,000 are usually in a white-collar profession where they are offered leave. It may not be ideal, it may not be perfect, but they have access in a way that low-income workers simply do not. And of course, we propose coupling this with a tax credit for truly small businesses. We don't want it to be something that Walmart's able to say, great, I've got this new tax credit, and it's just used to put the local hardware store out of business. We want this to truly be a way to assist those smaller businesses who would like to contribute. So that takes us to the question of whether or not the public is open to this idea. And I feel very enthusiastic that they are, actually. I think, as Brigid mentioned, and I'm probably equally at fault, there's a lot of confusion over this issue. What kind of access to paid leave? Who pays for the paid leave? When do you use the paid leave? Is this a women's issue, a man's issue, everybody issue? And so I think when people get a little bit more information, they realize that there are trade-offs, there are costs to the sort of top-down approach, and that they are wildly actually supportive of something that gives them more support. We did find that we conducted a randomized controlled trial last year. This is when the Healthy Family Act was being discussed. Similar to Pew, our control group was wildly supportive of this without any other information. About 60% of women in the control group supported it, only about 16% opposed it. It's a huge margin of support. But when they heard about how there may be an economic downside, how this may threaten their position in the workplace, that support dropped precipitously. And I think that that's important, because we can't just talk about this as if it's all rosy and that there's nothing downside. And so frequently, I feel like as sort of the free marketer, I'm kind of like throwing the wet blanket on things, but I think we have to. And then when people sort of have that information, they can be more informed and we can have a more honest discussion. And while it was very easy to persuade conservative women of this, and they start out very supportive of sort of a top-down plan too, so for the progressives in the room, you should be encouraged. You can get conservatives, but I can get liberals. The progressive women also were mostly concerned, and I think this is really interesting, they were mostly concerned that this would have a downside on the working poor, that this would hurt the very people it's intended to help. And I thought that's very encouraging. When you talk about this in a sort of an emotional, personal way, about how this will hurt your chances in the workplace, we changed the margin of support into a margin of opposition by a sizable amount. So I will just wrap up by saying that in all areas of our lives right now, we allow and encourage customization. I can order my groceries today to be delivered this afternoon exactly the way I want them. I can get an affordable box of clothing sort of designed for me, delivered to my doorstep tomorrow. My kids don't even know what commercials are, right? We customize our television preferences. So I think that it's sort of strange to think that there's anything in the workplace that we would want to standardize, right? Why should I assume that what I want or need is going to be the same as anyone else in this room? It may be at some point, but we want to open the marketplace up, the workplace up, for that kind of customization that has benefited us in so many other areas. And I think if we do that, we'll move towards a policy that is sustainable, that is affordable, and that is appealing to the largest number of people. So, thank you.
I should be quick, right? I should be quick.
Yeah.
Hi. Okay. So I've just been told that I've got -3 minutes.
Oh, sorry.
So I should be very quick. I can't do it quite that quickly. This is my exhortation, but we don't need it. There's been lots of discussion of men and of fathers today, so we haven't forgotten Dad, which is great. So that means I can be very quick. I'll make two opening comments. The first is just a general point, which is the acknowledgement we can't have gender equality in the labour market unless we have gender equality in the distribution of unpaid work. It's just mathematically impossible. And so let's at least be honest about that. My experience of this is conservatives tend to be honest about that. They tend to say, well, of course women earn less and don't go as far. They're doing more of the childcare. That's at least internally consistent. Progressives very often fall into the trap of saying, well, we'd like women to still do more of the childcare and raise the kids, but we also want absolute gender equality at work. And it seems to me that at least the conservatives are being honest about that argument. And so the conclusion that I draw from that is, if we're serious about gender equality in the paid side of work, we have to be equally serious about gender equality in the unpaid side of work too. The second framing point I just want to make is because of my background in the UK, I was part of the government in the UK that transferred us from a maternity leave-based policy to a shared parental leave policy. So the coalition government in which I worked inherited a situation where it had 12 months of maternity leave, 12 months. 6 paid, 6 weeks. Anyway, the details don't matter. And we've replaced that now with effectively 12 months that's shared between parents. They both have to have work, they both have work requirements. There's some complexity there, but we've basically taken the chunk of time and said, why don't you figure out between yourselves how you want to use that time? So I was part of that process. I've basically stolen everyone else's slides. So this is one from Pew, thanks to Kim and Juliana, and generally to Pew for the work that they do. I just think that's quite a remarkable finding. So I wanted to put it there again, because it's, aside from breastfeeding, who does a better job of caring for a new baby? Now, admittedly, there aren't very many who say that dad is best at it, but still, to have that kind of number who are saying equally, and in fact, among the under 50s, it's more than half saying that they're equally good at it, and they're the ones who, from a parenting point of view, should probably care about the most. So I just think that is, of course, there's some social desirability bias in there, but that is nonetheless a striking finding. Another finding I just wanted to pull out, which I haven't stolen this slide, but it's on page 49 of the report. It's also striking that most people don't think that when you have a young child in the house, both working full-time is the optimum. And that's true among younger workers as well. It's only 1 in 4 who say the ideal is let's both work full-time. But then when you dig into that and say, okay, so for those who don't think you should both be working full-time, that it should either be 1 at home or 1 part-time, what should the gender of the one who's working part-time or at home being? And the answer is we don't care. And the more educated the respondent, the less likely they are to say that they care. So it doesn't matter. So I think that's quite an interesting blend of what you might call a quotes conservative view, which is it's good if someone's around to help raise young kids, ideally one of their parents, and an egalitarian view, which is, but we shouldn't presume that that should be exclusively of one gender. So just wanted to draw attention to that finding too, because I think it's important. Now, I think someone just said we all have our own numbers. These are numbers from the American Family Survey that Carlin Bowman, Brad Wilcox, and I advise. And there's 2 things to say here. One is that when you ask, in this survey, they had much longer periods of leave than the Pew survey finds, 2 or 3 times as long in terms of what people said that their paid leave should be. But it's one of those things where you dig into it, and I don't know the answer yet, but I'm pretty sure these are means, whereas the median is the number presented in the Pew report. And if you dig into their numbers, you'll find that 41% of the Pew respondents said 12 weeks or more for mothers. So the median is going to give you a pretty different answer to the mean. That's not to say one is right or wrong, by the way. I'm just saying that when you're presenting these kinds of data, you can get quite different answers, because that 41% is probably going to pull up the mean quite a bit. But the reason I originally was going to put it up was that the BYU researchers who conducted this did something quite interesting, which is that they switched, for half the respondents, they asked about fathers and paternity leave first, then about maternity leave. And those are the results you can see on the right. It's when you ask about paternity leave before maternity leave, and the other, it's the other way around. And although the effects aren't absolutely dramatic, if you look at it, you can see that the gap reduces very significantly, right? The overall levels don't really change. So I just present that as tentative evidence that even in the way, the order in which you ask questions in a survey can disrupt the way people think about this, and it can disrupt them away from the traditional social norm. So if you ask about how much time should mums get off, and then, oh, how much time should dads get off, you get a different answer to if you ask how much time should dads get off, then how much time should mums get off. So it's a nerdy kind of survey point, but it might speak to a kind of deeper truth about the importance of social norms. Most of the other stuff I can go through pretty quickly because it's been covered. How much leave do men get in America? None, by comparison to all these other countries at a federal level anyway. This is OECD data, which is again showing paternity leave. And the reason I'm going to put this up is because it shows you on the left how long, this is just for fathers, how long a leave you can get, and on the right, what's the replacement rate. Typically, the shorter the leave, and I've cut this off, so that's why the US is on there. The short leave might even be at 100%. This is the UK in the old days. So if it's only like 1 or 2 weeks, it's quite generous. But then as the leave gets longer, then the replacement rate's going to go down. But look at Japan. Japan has arguably the most generous paternity or father-based leave policy in the world. It's very, very long, and it's very generously replacement rate. And how many Japanese men take it? Answer, almost none. Last time I looked at it, it was about 2%, 3% of Japanese men will actually kind of take it. All right? And so I just want to say that we can't assume policy will change culture, which is why these norms points and culture points are hugely important. That's despite adverts like this. This is not a government one. This is Nivea, Japan in the 2000s in an attempt to kind of shift some of the social norms about whether or not it's a good idea for Japanese men to take time off to look after their kids. And it didn't seem to have much effect, whereas the one that Brigid put up before, and I'm shocked she didn't know who it was. It's Hoa Dahlgren, the Swedish wrestler. Apparently.
I'll make a note of that.
Yeah. And in Sweden, we have seen a real shift in norms. Someone asked me if I knew what barnledig means. I don't know if there are any Swedish speakers here. I can only... Sorry? Daddy on leave. Daddy on child. Thank you so much. I assumed it was, can I hide in your hair? I think Brigid mentioned the Quebec shift. There's a whole series of policy experiments that have just basically provided use it or lose it policies for fathers. And there's a very good study by Anna Patnaik of the Quebec shift towards a more generous policy, and it also had 5 weeks that were basically only available to fathers. And the paper really does a very good job because she can compare it to the other provinces that didn't introduce it and a before and after. And sometimes when you're doing this kind of work, you're really squeezing the data to get a finding. You're really trying to do a difference in difference and see if you can find, where is it, and you're really having to sort of squirrel away to try and find it. Well, she doesn't need to do that. This is the before and after with the provinces that didn't have the policy change along the bottom and Quebec before and after. And this is participation rate in leave of the men. So she probably didn't need to actually do all that incredibly sophisticated statistical work. She did kind of find this because it's pretty obvious. At least there, in that cultural context, if you get offered men leave that was otherwise not going to be available to the couple, the men took it. And she finds, similarly to the work that Brigid cited, that there's this shift in kind of gender relations thereafter. And so you can change it. Having said that, it seems to me that really our goal should be to try and move towards giving more choice and flexibility to parents and allowing them to decide for themselves. I am torn on this issue, and I was torn on it in government. But for those of us who have criticized maternity-based policies that essentially reinforce this idea that this is just for women and a form of social engineering, we should be very careful not to just replace it with our own form of social engineering, which is, okay, let's just make some of this available to men. Tempting though that is, for those of us who want to shift social norms quickly, I think it is a more intellectually respectable position to try and find a situation in which you just give families as much choice as possible about how they will divide the labour between themselves, and trust that over time the social norms will evolve in the right way. So my conclusion is simply this, that attitudes have shifted. We should aim for equality in leave policy, give as much choice and flexibility as possible, and that culture and social norms matter a lot. And I'm also on Twitter, and I've got a newsletter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you for your comments, and we have some time for questions. I'm just going to open it up. I think, as Belle mentioned, one of the things that I found confusing in the Pew report was this overwhelming support for employers need to be doing something on paid leave. Like, this is not a government issue. This is something that employers need to handle. And at the same time, let's not do it through a mandate. Let's do it through voluntary tax credits or through encouraging people to have savings accounts. And my question is, if we, as an expert, as people who are sort of working in this policy sphere, whenever we hear about tax credits, our initial reaction is, well, that's not going to change the landscape. That's not really going to help a lot of employers to come up with their own policies. And I just wanted to get the opinion of the group. What do you make of this, to my mind, a confusing finding in the Pew report that employers need to do it? This is something employers need to provide. And yet, we really want this to be voluntary to some extent because we want to do it through tax credits. We don't want to make this a mandate. So what do you make of this sort of, to my mind, sort of conflicting finding in the survey? Harry, do you want to?
Well, to me, as Richard said, the sequence of the questions does affect the response. So if you're not thinking directly about what costs you're imposing, your first gut is like, sure, let employers take care of this. When you start talking more explicitly about how do you do that, and of course, some folks do own small businesses, and these, then they start to think about the cost. And as I said, I do think it's an American thing that a lot of them, they like the benefits. They don't want to bear the cost. The cost should be by someone else. And I think some combination of that, as soon as you think more about the cost, maybe you're reluctant. But I also want to use this, I just want to make one comment. It's a bit of always an elephant in the room, and we wrestled with it in our group. How can the European employers look so massively different on this? People like me who worry about imposing these costs on employers and how they'll react, and it seems like the European countries are really comfortable with 6 months of leave, and the employers, and I'm going to venture a guess that European employers are very, very different from American employers, and the social norms that they've embraced, they much more embrace the social democratic norms that are still very much alive in Europe. I don't perceive those among American employers. I think for a brief time after World War II, for that sort of golden period, at least large companies were more open to that notion. I don't see it now among large companies. I certainly don't see it among small. I think small, medium-sized American employers have this attitude, it's our business, it's my property. The government doesn't have the right to impose these rules and regs on me, and that they react. And if you say, well, but if you just impose it on them, they'll see how good it is and they'll adjust. I don't think that's accurate. Take the example of collective bargaining. The Wagner Act was passed over 80 years ago. American employers still fight it tooth and nail. And those who accepted it, in that golden era now are turning around. And so I just think, I don't think there's a quick way to make American employers be like the European employers. I don't think, like Richard said, I don't think there's an easy way to change these social norms or then to impose it and just think everybody will internalize it. And maybe when that evidence, that mixed evidence kind of reflects the kind of conflict that people feel about imposing costs on business.
That's right. Richard.
So I'd say, I think Harry's right. There's a social contract idea in Europe, but I'd also say that we shouldn't understate the fact that public policy can sometimes shift equilibria and shift social norms. I think you can see that in welfare reform to some extent in the US. And what will typically happen, so happened in the 1970s in the UK, is that employer groups bitterly opposed the introduction of maternity leave, saying that it would disrupt their businesses, small businesses in particular, was like, there's no way we can cope with it. And then the government at the time just said, we hear you, we're doing it anyway. And on the other side of it, everyone adjusted to it and moved on. And then the same about paternity leave and the same about sick leave. And there's a perfectly reasonable argument to be had there that this will impose costs on us. But actually public policy can create a new equilibrium. Whether that's a good one or bad one, I don't know. But I will say that from a European perspective, one of the things that you used to do is you look across at the US and say, look, not much collective bargaining, very lightly regulated labor market, but boy, look at their growth and their dynamism. And that's a kind of trade-off. So Europe, okay, we're not as dynamic, we don't grow as much, but we're more protected and we've got more. Now, it seems to me the argument's somewhat different. Now, the Europeans are not looking across the Atlantic at the US labor market and going, wow, what an amazing labor market. Now, they're kind of looking at it and going, well, actually, it's not that great, and still not that great. So in some ways, I think kind of the argument has changed. If the US was kind of powering away, lots of dynamism, small, fantastic, then you might say, okay, maybe you don't want to do anything that will threaten it. But you might actually, if the US labor market looks a bit more European, maybe US social welfare should look a bit more European as well.
But I was just going to add that I think that sometimes it's, which came first, the chicken or the egg, and there's cultural changes that are happening that I think, here in Washington, we love to assume that sort of any policies that we impose is what's going to change things. But the best thing that has happened for women in the workplace, in my view, has been technology. The reason that we're having this conversation on paid leave right now is because I could be off with my third child and say, but I don't have to really disconnect entirely. Maybe I can take a little bit longer as long as I can kind of call in for some of those conference calls, or I can check my email and just not drop, just keep some of the trains running on time. I might not be fully engaged, but it's allowed for sort of this middle ground now, which is something that men are enjoying as well. And we're saying, hey, everyone doesn't have to be in the office all the time to be productive. And guess what? You're not that productive when you sit in an office for 10 hours a day. We've learned that as well. And so I think that technology component is in fact sort of driving so much of this conversation, because people say, I don't even need to be there unless you're, again, this brings it back to the fact that it's really about low income workers who maybe, if you're a clerk, you have to be there. and at the high end, if you're a surgeon, you have to be there too. So.
Just a couple points that I want to make, just to piggyback a little bit on what Sabrina was saying. Actually the evidence, if you look at the Families and Work Institute's National Study of the Employer, that flexibility actually is not really increasing, and that certainly is, there's more unpredictability and chaos for kind of low-wage workers, so that's not something that they experience. I think, kind of going back to your original question, I think one of the things that really strikes me that I don't think we have a real understanding about, you talk about collective bargaining. Again, we don't really talk about that. I don't think workers in the United States understand kind of where they, kind of their kind of like where they sit in terms of, looking internationally even. I mean, you look at productivity rates, after the Second World War, I mean, they've really gone off the charts. And then you look at sort of where wages have been sort of stagnant or flat, depending upon kind of what study you look at. So, the workers have not been reaping the benefits of their labor. You could argue with that increased productivity, there should have been some kind of looking inward or reinvesting in your workforce, whatever R&D or whatever, and that really hasn't happened. There's been much more of a, capital going to the 1%. So I think that there's sort of a larger structural question to be asking here that I don't think that workers are aware of. And then the second point I'd make in terms of thinking that employers need to pay for this, again, in my reporting, even in the states that have paid family leave, a lot of people don't understand that it is a payroll tax. Or a lot of people will say, well, I don't want my taxes to pay for your baby. And they don't understand it's like that they're already doing it, and it's like a 1% tax. So again, I think there's a lot of confusion, because I don't think that we really talk about these issues. Look at major newspapers. Very few have a labor reporter anymore. We don't really talk about, I think there's just a lot of confusion and lack of education out there.
And quickly before I turn to the audience, on the should the policy be very targeted? Even in the Pew survey, I think one of the findings we had that about 26% of workers earning above $75,000 are still not getting paid leave. And then Sabrina, the survey you guys did, you were looking at a slightly higher wage group. It showed an average income of $95,000, and so really, like, even within sort of different income groups, it doesn't seem to be that everybody is benefiting from having a paid leave program, or doing really well with the fact that there's no sort of federal program. And so what are your views on, do we make the program really, really targeted to the very low income, given that they are sort of suffering the worst and have the least cushion to fall back on? Or are we in favor of a slightly more universal policy, like Harry pointed out?
I think it's got to be universal. That's the only way to get buy-in. And then you end up helping the targeted folks, but then you get buy-in from everyone. I think that there's research that shows that public policy that's more universal is more successful.
Universal is a lot more expensive. That's the downside.
Yeah.
But I still agree. I tend to think it should be universal. What we've learned in the last election, if no other time, is that there's a lot of folks above the poverty line who are hurting and who could benefit from some of these policies. I don't think we should ignore them. The benefits to families, to children are universal. I think, and my worry about tax credits is that you've seen a lot of that often they provide windfalls to companies who will do it anyway, but that the marginal change on behavior will be modest, and it won't be close to. So that's why I think even though I worry a lot about the cost, I think that would, in the end of the day, be insufficient.
I think
I guess.
sort of ultimately, I mean, the best solution, right, to all of this is a robust economy where there's plenty of job competition. So if you're that small percentage at the higher level who's not getting adequate paid leave, you would have say, I'm going to go to the company across the street because there would be competition of benefits and wages. That's why I'm much more in favor of a targeted approach, because let's help the people who truly are in need and are falling through the cracks. I think all Americans want to help those people, and that's what our research found, which I thought was tremendously encouraging. Their biggest concern was that a top-down approach and a mandate approach would not help the people that need it the most. And so I'd say target it, and then let's have a government get out of the way so we can have a very strong economy with lots of job creation and competition.
Richard, do you have any?
No.
Okay, great. We'll quickly
Let
open
dads do it all.
Hi, my name is Tove Bjørgaas. I'm a journalist from Norway. Very interesting to listen to you guys. We have a pretty generous system that is working well. It has its problems. We still have a lot of women in part-time jobs. It might be too generous. Your slide should show Norwegian men take very short leave with full pay because there's a law that says you have to take 6 weeks. But some, like the left, wants to increase that. My question is, I guess that's a million-dollar question, how to move forward in America. I mean, how do you do this? Do you do it the way Obama started with climate policy, sort of by pushing it along through maybe executive orders and then having private business follow along, and then at some point it's gotten so far that like everyone has to come on board, or do you do it through Congress? I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on how far we've gotten at this point. I think another point that is very different in at least my part of Europe and the US are, of course, the hours that people put in. We have a very regulated labor market. Most families work from like 8 to 4:30, and then they pick up their children from heavily subsidized, actually mandated daycare that costs about $300 a month per child from age 1 until they start school at age 6. And I think if you don't have anything like that, I mean, with like you were showing the cost of nannies, for instance, I mean, people might have to go back out of the labor market just to pay for. I meet moms here all the time who say they can't afford to pay for childcare. But my general question is just where do we move from here, and how far have we gotten, say, in the last 4 or 5 years?
Well, yeah, I would just say, there has been the Family Act sort of on the more the Democratic side that's been introduced for several years in Congress, hasn't really had a lot of movement. There's been sort of the Healthy Families Act on the Republican side, also not a whole lot of movement. There is more probably discussion. What the Obama administration did was have a fund to grant states, to give states the ability to investigate how to create their own state-paid family leave systems. And Vicki Schaeffer's here, she's been tracking a lot of that. That's probably where the most policy action has been in recent years, is on the state level. And that's actually what happened with the Unpaid Family Medical Leave Act that actually went through several states until it reached sort of a critical mass. And that happens, sort of, it was more like, well, why are we having all these little different policies? Let's have like one national policy. So that's one potential route forward, is continuing movement at the state level.
I think that's right. I mean, I think, given the polarization now. So the Trump campaign did embrace a policy. It was far less generous, closer, I think, to some of the things Brigid had talked about. It's possible. Oh, you're right. Sabrina, I'm sorry. It's possible that could come out of this Congress. I'm skeptical. In fact, if you look at the debacle over ACA, the fact that Republicans will coalesce around that seems very unlikely to me. So what you're probably going to have is the states moving ahead. I think what I would like to see is the red states starting to do. I mean, I'm worried about this massive gulf between the red and the blue states. So my hope is that some of the red states would start to do some of what you said. Maybe starting with tax credits, right. Maybe starting with voluntary savings accounts, and then maybe the notion that this is a positive thing will take hold there, and the notion that federal or state policy should do something to even encourage more of it. So that would be my best hope, whether in the current polarized environment, to me. It's not enough. I would prefer to see something broader, but that might be the most realistic.
I have a question then.
Across all four speakers,
Excuse me.
across all four speakers, every country you mentioned and every state that you have mentioned, except Iceland, has a lower fertility rate than for the non-Hispanic whites in the United States. Has anyone done an analysis to show that all these policies basically discourage the upper classes from having children?
I don't think that that's true on the fertility rate. I don't have the data.
Bulgaria is 1.3. If they've got the best Family Leave Act.
Oh, I don't think they do.
One of the lowest fertility rates.
No, I don't. I don't think that they do have the best leave. They have the longest, but I don't think that that's the best. I don't think it's working particularly well. The U.S. rate, my understanding.
California has the second lowest fertility rate in the United States for non-Hispanic white females, and they've had family leave since 2004. It seems like adding all the cost of doing business and all the taxes discourages upper middle class people from having children.
You can't necessarily infer a causal effect there. Right? It might just be that you have a lot of professional women that have selected to live in California, and professional women do choose to have fewer kids. So you can't. I just think you're making a big causal leap.
Well, and the other thing I would say, like in terms of the impact on you just look at people feeling stressed and overwhelmed, and feeling like they don't have enough time. I would say that has an awful lot more to do with our work culture. That we do value these long hours. That's one thing that you will see that in the European countries. It's not only do they have regulated, shorter hours, but there's also the feeling that if you work long hours there, you're not a better worker, which is the feeling here, but you're actually inefficient. So I would argue that probably has and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but that seems, at least anecdotally, to have an awful lot to do with why people do or do not choose to have children. The child care is wildly expensive, and then you have to work insane hours. So we don't really set it up culturally or structurally very family friendly in this country either.
Okay.
Thank you for the panelists. My name is Li Yang. I think go back to the point that I try to put something is compare the policies and the practice. Second is compare the household production in a sense. Whether you have analysis by demographic or by occupation, maybe some segment of those parents are maybe more knowledgeable or more concerned about health care. They know how to deal with the children or their babies rather than wait until the problem, until sickness, then you have to see the doctor and then take more leaves. Second is for the policy and practice sense. I wonder if you have analysis whether you, in the policy sense, they do have this policy for leave, but in practical sense, employer deny your leaves. And then whether you can one step further to follow up those maybe complain about the denial of leaves, how do they process, and where do you find a record to analyze it?
I'll just say briefly on that. So the point, if it's a law, then in theory they can't deny it to you. But you're right that people are still afraid, and it came out of the Pew Research, I think, which is that, and just because a law is passed doesn't necessarily mean the fear won't still be there, and the kind of social norms around it. So I think that's real. I would say on the household production point that the goal here should be to try and allow maximum choice and flexibility to do the kind of household production, how you're going to balance it between yourselves as flexibly as possible. And I think that does include leave, but I also think it includes fair scheduling. Massive lack of certainty. Like 40% of hourly paid workers in the key age demographic don't know their weekly schedule a week out. And the variation is up to 49%. How do you do household production? How do you raise kids when you don't know when you're going to be working 10 days from now, right? And that is not a problem for us. That is not a problem for the people we've been talking about. That's the problem there. So I think scheduling and time, all of that, because otherwise the fear that a lot of us have had is that rather than trying to create family-friendly work, we end up creating work-friendly families. And what we're really trying to do is just maximize economic production from women as well as men now. And actually, that's completely the wrong way around. It should be about, it seems to me that particularly the results of the surveys reinforces. People want to raise their kids. They want to share it between them. And so we want to try and create a labour market that allows them to do that, rather than assuming this kind of Stakhanovite view, which is just, hey, men have been working 50 hours a week for forever. Let's all do that. Wouldn't that be amazing? That's not what people want. It's not what my generation of men want, let alone what women want.
I think that there's, because I agree with everything you're saying, and at the same time, I think that we can easily sort of fall down this rabbit hole of sort of this domino effect of regulations, right? So, I mean, there's trade-offs to all of these. If you start regulating schedules, then a restaurant that says, wow, there's going to be a snowstorm, I want to have more people on staff, and guess what? There's a lot of workers who want those extra hours. And so I think we have to just have a very light touch on the workplace, because I think it makes us feel good and it sounds good and it makes us think that people are going to be able to raise their families better, but it's not always that black or white. I just think that there's the person who wants to pick up the extra shift because they have, they want to send their kid to camp. That matters too. And so it's just it's not perfect. I'm not ignoring that. I'm frequently overwhelmed and running around like a chicken with my head cut off. But I do think that there's for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, and we too often sort of overlook that. And with the workplace, it can just kind of spiral out of control.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists. Please join me in a round of applause. And thank you all for coming.